We're going to start off this panel with a quick round of one favorite thing about mushrooms. I'm going to start with you, Esther, if that's all right. What is the one favorite thing about mushrooms?
Favorite or interesting? I find them fascinating because they are chemical factories. We relate with environment with our behavior, moving and acting. Other organisms like plants, they grow and they have morphology that allow them to survive and adapt to their environments. Fungi communicate with chemicals. They are all chemistry. They eat through chemicals. They release enzymes into the environment and decompose the food and absorb them. They have chemical wars. That's how they compete with their competitors. So this is they are chemistry, pure chemistry.
Gosh.
And I find that quite fascinating and unique.
Amazing.
To fungi.
Chemical warfare. I love it.
Yeah.
Tom, what is your favorite thing about mushrooms?
I think the thing, I'm also interesting. I probably would have said biochemistry as well.
Yeah.
Because it is probably the most interesting thing about mushrooms. But what I love about mushrooms is their sort of randomness, the fact that you never actually know when they're going to appear. So from a forager's perspective, you always think it's the right time to find mushrooms. I have spent literally days searching for mushrooms where I was adamant it was the perfect conditions. And I think that sort of inability to nail down the fungi, the fact that they're sort of have such a sort of intrinsic part of a lot of folklore, and the idea that they're there for a very short period of time, and if you're not there when they're there, 36 hours later you'll be walking past them and they won't be there anymore, and you had no idea they were there. So I think the transient nature of fungi is probably one of their most alluring characteristics.
Wow. And Tim, what is one of your favorite things about mushrooms?
I like the fact they're closer to humans than they are to plants, and that they produce amazing products, like they sunbathe and will, like humans, produce vitamin D. And they can also produce vitamin B12, which really important for vegans. And so, you know, it's those sort of human similarities that I like and makes me really fond of them.
Yeah. Wow. So already I'm sure you can get a sense of just how incredible mushrooms are. The way I like to think about mushrooms myself, and I want to get your opinion on this, Esther, is I sort of categorize them as culinary mushrooms, so mushrooms that you cook with, well-being mushrooms, nootropics that we'll get into a little bit later, and then you've got therapeutic and medicinal mushrooms, of which there's a lot more research these days around mental well-being, etc. How would you? Is that a fair characterization of mushrooms in general? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Perhaps I would add one more category would be fungal applications in general. In industry, we are suffering plastic crisis, for example, and there's a lot of research now and companies that are trying to find solutions to that and producing biomaterials out of fungi. That includes building blocks and furniture, fabrics, clothing, all types of things. Almost this any material that you can think of right now is being researched on fungi to be replaced with mycelium. It's easy to grow, doesn't occupy much space, it's sustainable, it's biodegradable, and I think that's almost a treasure trove in terms of applications of fungi.
Yeah.
Apart from obviously the classic edibility and medicinal properties they have as well.
At the start, I messed up the 1.25 million fungal specimens by saying there were species. I wonder if you could talk us through the difference between the species, how many species we know of, and what we've yet to discover.
Yeah, definitely. We like to show up a lot about our collection in Peru. It's as you mentioned, is the largest collection in the world. But more importantly, we know very, very little about fungi, and probably you've heard about that already. we had described about 150,000 species of fungi that have actual names, that a scientist or someone has put a name on them. But our estimates is that most likely there are 2.5 million, 3 million of species of fungi out there, unknown fungi that don't have names yet, that need to be discovered. And those fungi can be almost anywhere in your bodies, inside plants, in the soil, in the ocean, anywhere. And we're using just a handful of them. So we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of fungal knowledge. We need to discover much more and put names to those, or at least know what they are and where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were saying before we started this the panel about deserts. You find them in the sea. You find them. Where else do you find them? Because I just think of mushrooms in the forest. Perhaps.
Yes,
some might grow them.
They're everywhere. You can find them. They adapt to almost any environment, and you can find them even in the driest valleys in the Antarctica, for example. You have fungi that associate with other organisms. For example, lichens are symbiosis between a fungus and an algae, and they are able to colonize deserts and very dry environments because they bring their own food with them, so they can colonize almost anywhere. There are other fungi that are thermophilic. That means that they can survive to very high temperatures, like some groups of bacteria. So you can find them in very hot habitats, almost anywhere. And the other thing is that they evolve very quickly, and they can mutate very quickly and adapt to climate change and global change. And that's something that we're keeping an eye on, because that allows them to adapt to different environments, and that includes our bodies.
Gotcha.
So it may be that some fungi that right now are not harmful to humans, in the short period of time may be problematic.
Okay.
They drilled an ice core in Antarctica down to 20 million years ago, and they found a couple of spores, and they managed to fruit those spores. The thing about mushroom spores is they are unbelievably tough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you take them up to space, they don't seem to get affected by radiation, and within the spore it has all the energy it needs to basically fruit. So like a seed stores, but they are just so much tougher. Wow. And so fungi do have, there's admittedly not a very popular theory, but there is a theory that life was potentially spawned through a spore traveling on an asteroid and coming over here, because they can survive for tens of millions of years in space.
They'll definitely outlive us, won't they?
They were here way before us, and they'll be here way after us.
Yeah, no, I think it's a bit of humility there, that these guys are much better adapted to our planet than we are.
Absolutely. And Esther mentioned food there. I want to bring you in, Tim, because you're a food guy now. You've got a new cookbook out. Mushrooms feature quite a lot in your diet. Tell us a bit about the benefits of mushrooms to our health.
Well, I was very skeptical about mushrooms and health and mushroom coffee, and just saw it as a bit of a wacky thing until I started for Food for Life, where I've got a chapter on mushrooms and fungi, and going to the literature and actually working out what was going on. And although a lot of it is done on, from Chinese medicine and from lab sort of test tube projects, which I don't always rate very highly, there are enough clinical studies now to show that mushrooms have big anti-inflammatory effects. They have big anti-cancer effects, and 4 or 5 studies now showing that if you give it with chemotherapy, you can actually improve health outcomes by 50%, which is amazing, really. Not instead of chemotherapy, just in case anyone wants to know out there, but in addition, what we call adjunctive therapy. And so once I started reading this in reputable journals, that really converted me to say, gosh, there must be all this stuff in here, all these chemicals in here that we don't really understand, that have these really powerful effects that could affect every bit of us, not just our immune systems to beat inflammation and cancer, but our mood and energy and depression levels and things, just from the tens of thousands of chemicals that these guys can produce. And yes, you eat them, but we also have other fungi in our guts as well, which we know are crucial for our immune system. So when they've done experiments and they've tried to take away those fungi in our guts, colitis gets worse and many conditions get worse. So we don't understand it very well at all because they're much harder than bacteria to look at from a genetic point of view. But everything we see about them is they're super beneficial. So it's always odd. I always laugh when people come back and say, I've been to Harley Street and I've been told I've got overgrowth of fungi or yeast and I have to go on this 1-year cure. They say, well, why would you do that? Yes, occasionally they go out of balance, but that's usually because of antibiotics or something. Not naturally, we should be embracing them and not fearing them. I think that's really important.
And you mentioned there about eating mushrooms and stuff, particularly from the perspective of supporting your immune system. Are you talking about the sort of regular mushrooms that we can all buy at our local supermarkets, as well as perhaps the more novel mushrooms that we'll get to talking about in a moment? Just a quick one. If you want to learn the 5 ingredients that I think are fantastic for inflammation that you should be getting into your diet every week, then download this PDF right now. It's in the link down there, and I'll send you my 5 ingredients for inflammation.
Well, when you look at the literature, it's hard to tell exactly. No one's systematically gone through all the mushrooms and said, from the button mushrooms you buy, the cheapest ones at the supermarket, to the most expensive, lion's manes or whatever they are, the trendy ones at the moment. They've taken generally the ones from Chinese medicine that have been used for many centuries or thousands of years and used those rather than the common ones. But I suspect that the common ones are nearly as good. They often may not have the same concentrations, but they'd have a lot of the same ingredients as these other mushrooms. But I'd be interested to hear what these guys think about the difference between a standard field mushroom, button mushroom, portobello mushroom that you can get cheaply everywhere, and the more expensive exotic ones that you're paying lots of money for in their often dehydrated forms, where all the studies have been on.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, I tend to go based on what the science tells me. So they say that yes, reishi mushrooms, lion's mane, they're the ones where most of the evidence is they've been tested. It doesn't mean the others don't work.
Sure.
It just means we still don't really know. So I personally believe that they're all good for you. And that in a way with Zoe, we've got a product out where we have 30 freeze-dried, I call them plants, but no insult for any fungi out there, mushrooms. They're plus 6 freeze-dried mushrooms in small amounts, containing, these ones that are in these medicinal ones. And I think it was for that reason we don't know what the exact chemicals are in each of them that is producing the benefit. So best to have as many as you can and in variety. And that's why I think these sort of approaches in the future, rather than relying on only one for the whole of your life, we should, at the moment, until we know more, try be eating a diversity of mushrooms. And I've certainly changed so that, every week I'm having, several big mushroom dishes. And with this daily 30, I can then have a small amount daily. And I think a lot of these other supplements are based on this, whether it's coffee or whatever it is, to try and change our habits until we know precisely what it is and what the doses are, etc.
Tom, let's talk about some of those trendy.
Yeah, there has actually been a long-term study done in Japan
with
38,000 men over 40 years.
The prostate cancer study.
Prostate and colon cancer. And the group of men that are eating mushrooms on average 5 times a week, as opposed to the group of men that are eating mushrooms twice a week, had around about 30% lower incidence of prostate and colon cancer. And so I think fundamentally with mushrooms, in terms of the compounds, we know that one of the dominant sort of groups of compounds that are relevant from an immune regulation perspective are things called beta-glucans that are interesting because of their unique molecular structure. They're sort of 1,3,1,6 of the 3rd and 6th carbon atom, they spike, and they're ubiquitous across all mushrooms. And so fundamentally from a health perspective, the best thing you can do is just eat more mushrooms. It's not really that important whether or not it's shiitake or oyster. Probably in this study in Japan, the dominant ones probably would have been shiitake and oyster, probably some others as well. But yeah, fundamentally just eat more mushrooms. That is the best thing you can do from a long-term
And the
health
other,
perspective.
I mean, there are some studies showing their effect on the gut microbiome as well, along in mouse microbiome where they've sort of managed to get the doses right, and they do show that you can improve the gut microbiome by feeding mushrooms. So having it as a prebiotic, and I think what's interesting is because they're so different, because they're not plants, you've got these different, in a way, foods for your gut microbes to live off. And I think that's really important as well. So adds diversity because you can't get them from anywhere else. There's these unique structures of the cell walls. I always say chitins, but is it
Chitin.
chitin?
Yeah.
Chitin.
What's that? Chitin.
Chitin.
Yes.
So chitin's an absolute nightmare from our perspective.
Okay.
Because, and this is also one of the other issues with comparing studies that are done in Asia and then assuming the same thing will happen with, a man from Stoke. Fundamentally, mushrooms are made of chitin, which is the same thing as the exoskeletons of insects or crustacean shells. The structure of chitin is a nightmare to break down. So we're interested in breaking down the chitin cell or extracting from it. But it's a helix shape. So, I was talking to the vice chancellor of Exeter Uni, who spent 40 years trying to extract from chitin. And he said, the best extraction methodology in the world, so we use ultrasonics, pressure, different pHs, all sorts of things to try and you can get maximum 20% of the compounds out. Now, the issue in comparing our gut biomes in the UK, we eat a lot less crustaceans and a lot less mushrooms. So naturally we have lower levels of chitinase, the enzyme in our gut we need to break down mushrooms. So by us eating a lot of mushrooms, obviously our gut biome will change over time, but initially we won't be getting as much as a man from, Hokkaido, for example, out of that mushroom. And so you've got to be very careful looking at making assumptions on studies done in different population groups where the gut biomes are very different, where their history of,
And I would add to that, I would like to make a recommendation of eating always cooked mushrooms. Not
What was that, sorry?
cooked mushrooms.
cooked rather than raw.
Cooked
not
rather
raw.
than raw. For a simple reason, I agree that they're really good, but as I was saying earlier, they have lots of compounds, and you never know when you have a raw mushroom if you have any compound that you may be allergic to. If you cook them, you get rid of some of those enzymes that may be bad for your for your body, and you still get the benefits of eating mushrooms.
What was really interesting is dehydrated mushrooms seem to have the same nutrients as the ones with the water in, and of course they're about, most of them are nearly 90% water.
exactly. Yeah.
But you inactivate the other compounds as well.
Yeah, well, the nasty ones that you don't really want, that are keeping predators away. So
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
I think-
yes.
Interesting with shiitake, I've got personal experience with me and Elle, my partner. So shiitake, about 5% of people that eat shiitake get something called shiitake flagrante dermatitis. And this is an unbelievable skin condition. It looks like you've been mauled by a tiger.
Oh gosh.
And it's literally
it's
scratch marks
it's
all over
scary.
your body.
Yes.
And Elle was going, I think it's the mushrooms. I was like, don't be so bloody ridiculous. It's not the bloody mushrooms. and then she Googled it, and guess what? Yeah, you do look like you've been, Genghis Khan or whatever the name of the.
she survived to tell the
Yeah. So and it is a real, and it is, and actually it's the same with about 5% of people with certain types of oyster mushroom have the same reaction. So it is there are a lot of chemicals in these mushrooms that are difficult for your body to metabolize, and for a decent proportion of people, raw mushrooms, have an unpleasant side effect.
All the mushrooms you've consumed so far have been thoroughly cooked. And everyone's probably
checking their skin.
checking their skin.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about nootropics. Tom, how would you describe what a nootropic is?
I'm a bit skeptical on nootropics.
I love
So
that.
I know that
The
everyone.
word or the product?
Well, I mean both. I mean the word. I love words. So the word has value, but quantifying or qualifying what the effect of a nootropic is. So I think the idea with a nootropic is that it can, outside of the value it brings from a sort of nourishment perspective, it can have added benefits from a health perspective. Quite often people are keen on improving their sort of cognitive function, and we find a lot of people, for example, especially in the modern day, feel that the issues in the head, and if they could just sort their head out, everything would be fine. More often than not, what manifests in the brain is just the product of what's happening in the body. And so I'm quite skeptical, and there's a lot of people into biohacking. I'm a little bit skeptical that this is, again, just indicative of where our society is at the time, where technology has progressed so far, and we used to think that we were going to be able to solve all our societal ills through the progression of technology, and now we're turning technology, we realise that's not going to happen. We're now turning technology onto ourselves to try and improve ourselves, and I think that's sort of perhaps where we are from a... But nootropics is a big market because everyone's trying to live forever. And
does everyone know what that term means?
Yeah, what is it?
Do you know?
No, I think we should. Do you want to?
Okay,
I was
my
wondering.
cynicism. yeah.
I don't think everyone knows exactly what nootropic refers to.
Well, you explain what a nootropic is.
Oh no, you guys are the experts. Do you want to?
So as Tom was saying, this enhances the cognition, but it's basically physically what it means is that your neural branches grow, enhanced. But how can you measure that? And it's been proven that it's very difficult to prove that, measure that in vivo, and that's why. How can you measure that your neural networks are growing and getting longer and more connected?
So whilst I am cynical, we are actually funding, the only people funding a PhD looking at the neurotrophic and neuroprotective compounds in mushrooms at the neuroscience. So I am cynical, but I'm also interested in actually finding out, because there are a couple of studies that have been done in Japan which look at people taking lion's mane, for example, at 4, 8, 12, 16 and 20 week period, and they're tested on international cognition scores at every 4 weeks, and they do go up every time to 16 weeks, but these are people with early onset dementia. So what that probably shows is that actually there's, and what we think is happening, there's a precursor to an enzyme that breaks down to a degree the amyloid plaque buildup on the synaptic receptors. So more of the signals are going in. It doesn't show that for a healthy brain anything's going on. But what was very interesting in that study, when they tested them at week 20, where they hadn't been taking the lion's mane for 4 weeks, all the test scores fell back down to where they started at. So there does seem to be something going on which is contained within the lion's mane, which these people with early onset dementia, it was a tiny study, it was 40 people, which their brains are making use of. So, and I think at the end of 16 weeks, they'd improved their test results by 13.8%, which is statistically significant. So
and that makes me very happy.
I was just going to try and say,
good. Because
this is going to turn into a real academic explanation. And I'm just conscious that everyone's probably been bombarded with like an advert that says, take this product and your brain will grow. Is everyone? I'm seeing a few nods there. Yeah. Or like, it will boost your neurons and it will help you think sharper. And what you're saying is there's no actual way of being able to scientifically validate that.
We're trying.
Oh, you're trying. Okay,
paraphrasing. It's called
cliffhanger.
Nutribollocks. There we go. Anyway,
that's what I wanted to, because we were chatting before with Tom about lion's mane.
Okay.
So everyone was like, no, lion's mane. And I went to the pharmacy and 40 pounds for a pot of powder of lion's mane. Such miraculous powders. So so with another student at Kew, we've been sequencing lion's mane genomes. Is that genome is the whole sequence of DNA that we all have and all organisms have, right? So we are comparing the whole DNA sequence of several lion's mane strains and comparing them with other species of fungi that are related to lion's mane. Hericium is the Latin name, and we found that lion's mane species has particular genes that are involved in the production of the compounds that are beneficial, that have been proven to be active in these clinical trials. The genes involved in those compounds that code those compounds seem to be duplicating in the fungi, in the lion's mane that is medicinal. So through evolution, from lots of millions of years, those species of fungi have developed a genomic signature. They have duplicated the genes that are useful for that particular compound.
Okay.
You will wonder, why do they want to be beneficial to humans? Well, probably those compounds are useful for them for another completely different purpose, but we can recycle that process, and those genes that have been duplicated and copied many times to produce lots of that compound that is actually useful for us.
Yeah.
But now we can say there's something in the DNA, and we can compare the species that is beneficial versus species that is not.
Quite interesting for
with
me
the
is
signatures of
also,
the DNA.
I think one of the ones that has been hopefully profiled is the one that we grow, because I gave one to Rich, who works at the Fungarium. So hopefully it's actually going to be one of the ones in there. So,
but
that's
the idea of finding evidence for those claims. So we can look at the DNA, we can look at clinical trials, and put all together all this evidence and say, okay, we are safe, it works, and we can prove it. We can sequence, or we can test it.
I've always wondered, why do mushrooms even create these products? And I think the reason being is that the mycelium of mushrooms is one cell wall thick, so anything can pass into the body of mushrooms. And like 1.5 billion years ago, the only family of life on Earth was fungi. It was just fungi, bacteria, other fungi, and viruses. And so these were getting into the bodies of all these different fungi. They were having to launch biochemical reactions to outcompete them, or to somehow adopt them into their being, or to form symbiotic relationships. And so over 1.5 billion years, that's a lot of research time they've had. And because of the fact that they've developed these compounds for whatever reasons for their own benefits, but because of where the humans sit from the evolutionary perspective, a lot of the actual shape of these compounds that mushrooms make are recognized within receptor cells within the human body. You know, they are actually useful. Not all of them, but some of them are actually useful. And you don't get that so much in plants, much less in plants. And so that's the reason, why there is this crossover between the biochemistry that the fungi conduct for their benefit and the biochemistry that our bodies conduct for our benefit.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, you've done a series of books on the benefits of plants more generally to our health. Can you see the sort of comparisons or parallels with other plants in different kingdoms that have benefits to the human health?
Yeah, I mean, all plants have defense chemicals, as you're alluding to. And so there's a general idea in nature that the more susceptible the plant is to nature or to bugs, the more chemicals it's going to produce. So that's why you take a lettuce, a loose leaf lettuce is going to produce more plant chemicals than a really tight iceberg type lettuce, which is physically protected, therefore it doesn't have to produce anything. That's why it's got nothing in it. It's worthless. But if you've got a Rosso Lolo that's got leaves that are sort of flapping around, it's quite vulnerable. So it has to have a bit of bitterness, it has to have color, all these other things that make it special. And so they produce plants predominantly polyphenols, polyphenolics, this type of defense chemical, but it's their way of doing what the fungi are doing. Fungi are much more precise. They'll produce penicillin, or they'll produce antibiotics as well, a much wider group. And these polyphenols will ward off insects and other things, but when they get inside a human body, the microbes in our gut will process them and use them. And I think the same is likely to be happening in fungi. When you're ingesting some of those extra chemicals, then that's actually helping our own microbes produce their own, and other, who are also factories, produce even more chemicals. So I think this is general in nature that is there, but definitely fungi are the powerhouses here. I don't know if I've done relative comparisons of them, but there's huge variations in the plant world, and I suspect the fungi it's more up the top end. There's not many equivalents of an iceberg lettuce of the fungi, but there might be a really bland one that does nothing, but I'd be surprised. Maybe the button mushroom has evolved to be like the iceberg
as well. No, it's pretty complicated.
That's what I imagine.
So, Tom, look, we've heard so much about the benefits to our gut health, just how varied everything is. This audience is sold, I'm sure, on the benefits of having all these different trendy types of mushrooms. How do you tell the difference between a lion's mane powder on one sort of pharmacy or wellness shop and another one that you might find online? Because it all seems to be the same.
I've spent the last 6 years trying to understand what people are selling. So it is.
Does anyone check it?
No one checks it.
No one checks it.
No one checks it.
Okay.
So there was a study done, interestingly, in 2019 in the US, where a company bought 17 different reishi products off the shelves in health food shops, and then they DNA profiled those 17 powders, and 12 of them didn't have any reishi in them.
Oh, wow.
Because the vast majority of companies are buying in powder from China. 95% of the mushrooms that are used in the UK and globally to a degree is from China. And they are far ahead of us when it comes to cultivating mushrooms, the science, they are very, very much ahead of where we are in terms of their knowledge and everything else. But the reality is that no one who's buying in these powders is testing them. The only test they're doing is heavy metals. No one's checking to see if it is even reishi or lion's mane. You don't have to.
Are they generally mushrooms of some kind, do you think?
No, what the majority is, and we know it's maltodextrin is the vast majority.
Yeah.
Maltodextrin.
Yes,
So
yes,
It's a filler.
The interesting thing about maltodextrin is you don't have to put it on the ingredients list. So you can claim 100% pure mushroom extract powder, and it'll actually be 90+% maltodextrin.
So this is something that we're
That's
trying
terrible.
to develop at KU. We have some quite a tradition on testing for plants, and making sure that what is imported is the right plant. But there is a legal gap with fungi. Yeah. So we are thinking
because it's not a plant.
No,
and it's viewed as having no medicinal value, according to the regulatory perspective.
It doesn't matter. Just let them get away with whatever they can.
At the moment, yeah.
So it would be one of the options that would be easy is just simply sequence a piece of the DNA, a little piece of DNA, barcode, and that's what we do with plants, and it would be easy for fungi as well. Yeah. So the infrastructure is not there yet, but I think that would be.
So many people are just having daily spoonfuls of maltodextrin, which is
really
giving
bad.
a bit of sugar spike.
Exactly.
And that's a good.
Yeah, that's the best.
That's the best case scenario. Because it could be something completely different.
You don't want to know what the other ones
No
are.
one actually knows,
So some substrates where they can grow anywhere, right? We say we can grow anywhere, but they can grow, for example, on top of coffee beans. And if you eat that mushroom, that mycelium would be full of caffeine, heavy metals.
So in terms of bioaccumulation,
they absorb them all.
And they don't. So they absorb them from the environment, but they don't metabolize them. They don't destroy them. So if you eat the fungus, you will eat whatever has been absorbing. So you have to be careful.
So
this is why fungi are so interesting from a bioremediation perspective.
Can I just ask, why are they not associated with plants? What are the rules? Is this in every country? Or is it just in Europe and America? And
it's the cultural. Yes. It's our cultural use of them. So we don't have a long history of using fungi from a medicinal perspective.
Because when we added it to our mix, we couldn't call it a food.
Yeah. It depends.
So we added it to our these other 30 plants, added 6 fungi, and suddenly the whole thing couldn't be called food, and we it had to be called a supplement.
Yeah.
It's slightly crazy.
It depends slightly on the mushrooms that you're putting in. So there are.
If there were 6, you might got away with a few.
Yeah.
Like a button mushroom or portobello.
You'd be fine with those.
They can't be called
No.
food.
Perhaps if you were putting in turkey tail or cordyceps, did you put any of those?
Yes.
Yeah, then they fall outside of, because we don't have
This
like a
is
traditional.
insane.
Yeah. Everyone's getting new information today, including everyone here as well. Just to clarify, so for as you know, there are no regulations around exactly labeling what's in the product. For consumers, are there any telltale signs that there is a company that is doing the due diligence despite not being mandated to?
I think the like anything in life, fundamentally, if you know the provenance of something, so if you know it's grown here, that's a good start. And so I think fundamentally the only thing that you can actually know or try and find out is the source of it. And if you know the source, you're like halfway there. So try and find out.
So whoever's gone to China to actually see them growing and then check that.
I know most of the people in the medicinal mushroom market, and apart from one guy called Martin Powell, who's he's sort of the godfather of medicinal mushrooms. He's a biochemist by training and classic Chinese herbalist. His products, I believe in, pretty much if you see any big brands, don't buy them. That's pretty much a guarantee. So any Dirty, for example, that has next to nothing of any significance in it. So any of the bigger companies, generally, you can be relatively confident that they're not doing a particularly good job. So I think it's really hard because it costs a lot of money to do the research, and there's no profit in doing the research, especially when there's no requirement to substantiate what you're doing. I was on a panel discussion with the sort of largest medicinal mushroom, the CEO of the largest medicinal mushroom company in Europe, and someone asked a question about dosage, which is, for us, we have a lot of people with quite acute conditions that take our products. So we're obviously interested in, what is a meaningful dose for these people. And Eric, said he wasn't a doctor, so it wasn't his job to decide what a dose was. And we've tested his products. We know his products are 6 times weaker than ours, but he's very profitable. And the problem is when there's no regulations, there's no standards to be adhered to, you can make money if you want to by just selling shit. And you're never going to get caught. And so obviously from our perspective, we believe that there's enough evidence that the compounds in these mushrooms have clinical value fundamentally, and therefore by making sure that we have something meaningful from a sort of molecular weight perspective of a group of compounds in 1 milliliter of our tincture, people will notice the difference, and that fundamentally.
And is your warning about powders, is that the same as freeze-dried products where you can
when you can see them, then you can be okay. Again, the issue is to a degree how they've been
it's a uniform powder that you've got no clue what's in it.
You've got absolutely no clue. And what's the other thing to bear in mind from the reality of what's happening in China. So traditionally everything was grown in Fujian province on the sort of east coast. Because of the desertification that's taking place at the moment, 2.5 years ago, the communist government stopped them from cutting down trees, and the majority of the mushrooms we grow are wood decomposers. And so about, I don't know how many thousand now, about 30% of production has shifted over to Xinjiang province in the northwest, basically the Urga area. And a lot of the mushrooms now are coming from the one part of China you're not supposed to be buying anything from.
Oh, wow.
Just explain what ergot poisoning is.
Well, ergot is an interesting one. So ergot's, I was saying ergot. The ergot's not the ergot.
The ergot.
Yeah, I can go on about ergots for ages.
Is it also pronounced Uyghur?
Uyghur.
Sorry.
Uyghurs, that's right.
Uyghur, sorry.
I
think ergot's a great one to talk about. So,
it's another topic.
Another topic, yeah.
So it's an area of China which is...
Yeah, it's an area in China
huge
where...
human
politically
rights.
controversial.
Yeah, very controversial.
And so that's where a lot of the mushroom farming is taking place now.
I'm conscious that I want to get some questions from the audience because they're going to have as many burning ones as me. Perhaps if we just complete this panel session here by just giving one piece of advice perhaps to our audience before we invite the questions. Nothing's medical advice, just to hasten that. Esther, do you want to start us off with one piece of advice for our audience about mushrooms?
I have,
Sorry, I put you on the spot there.
I have a couple, but
Yeah,
I
a couple. No,
can't
go
remember.
for it. Go for it.
Very, very easy ones. For those that are vegan and don't want to eat meat, I was discussing that earlier. Microprotein. Keep it simple. It's true that there's lots of medicinal properties, but if you want to get very efficient protein, eat fungi, eat mushrooms. They are a good source of microprotein, and microprotein, because as we said earlier, fungi are closer to animals. It's more and more efficient than the most plant proteins. So, if you want to have lots of good protein, eating mushrooms is a good source for them. And if you're bored from eating only tofu or tempeh, you can mix it with mushrooms. The other thing is we haven't tackled psilocybin and magic mushrooms, etc.
I really want to talk about that as well.
That and it's classic. I'm sure there will be some questions about that.
Sure.
One piece of advice: don't eat mushrooms. This has to be controlled, and you can have the actual compound isolated from the mushroom, but don't eat mushrooms because you cannot control how much of that chemical you are consuming, and it can be very, very dangerous. Mm-hmm. It's something that is been talked a lot, but people still do it.
Sure.
And I suggest don't do it because it's very dangerous, and you can end up very badly.
Tom?
I would just get people to go out and find mushrooms, pick them, take them home, and try and identify them. Don't have to eat them. That's the thing that honestly, you don't need to worry about eating the mushrooms you find. It's fascinating. As soon as you start trying to understand what you're looking at and look at the different sort of characteristics of mushrooms. I mean, I love plants. I've grown lots of plants, and I love all things to do with nature, but it is fascinating, honestly, just picking mushrooms, studying them, trying to understand what they are. I mean, you will waste a huge amount of time initially. But don't be scared. Stop being scared of mushrooms. There's nothing to be scared about. So that would be my recommendation.
Mine is eat as many mushrooms as you can every week and use any excuse to add mushrooms to your dish. And the new cookbook coming out, and you can pre-order, is full of mushroom recipes, but also interchangeably, gives you that umami flavor that as we're trying to move away from meat for the planet, it's a fantastic way to add this in. So I'm now eating mushrooms regularly, and it's part of my sort of grocery list rather than some exotic thing that I used to get very occasionally. And I think you just get used to that rich umami taste that means you don't miss meat at all. I think this is what we should all be doing because it's so healthy for us. And
absolutely.
If you can't do that, well, bit of freeze-dried mushrooms and a daily 30 would do. Because it's not always easy to wherever you are. I mean, you live on, you're surrounded by them. Yeah. But I know that many people, many people don't get those opportunities. Yeah. But dried ones are just as good. I think it's
it's like they're like peas. They freeze well.
Yeah.
And they retain all the properties.
Keep them from the season, pick them, and dry them out and use them next year.
Brilliant. All right, so eat lots of mushrooms, don't eat certain types of mushrooms, and experiment with going to find some mushrooms.
Yeah, there we go.
That's fab. I think we have a second canapé. Is that right now, Hattie? And that will kickstart our Q&A session. Can I just go straight into the Q&A? Is that all right? Yeah. Okay, great. So if anyone has any burning questions for our panel, you any recipes, recipe ideas, or anything like that, got one right. You there? Is that? You there? Yeah, sorry, I can't see here because I'm being blinded by the light. Go. Oh, there's two of it. Okay, you go ahead. You go ahead in the first row.
So my question was obviously a lot of great benefits, eating mushrooms and having them as supplements, etc. We didn't touch on psilocybin.
We didn't touch on psilocybin. No, we didn't.
There was a lot of research being done on microdosing. Benefits around depression, mood. If that's moving towards a direction of becoming more legal and normalized, does that trump eating a lot of mushrooms? So if we go into a new world of the benefits of that, is that
Yeah, so the question was about psilocybin and new research around psilocybin and its benefits for mental well-being. Who wants to defend that? Do you want to go
I
to
can
that, Tim?
start and you can
Yeah.
correct me. Yeah, so the data are very clear that medicinal levels of psilocybins, either in the mushrooms themselves or extracts, is a really good treatment for depression, anxiety, and potentially schizophrenia. These are done in randomized controlled trials with placebo arms, perfectly balanced. People are using that to say, okay, well, let's use you tiny doses of this so you don't get any hallucinatory effects on a daily basis, and this will have some other benefits. As far as I know, there are no good placebo-controlled trials showing that is of benefit. Lots of anecdotal studies, people saying, I feel better on it. We don't know how much of that is the placebo effect of taking something that you believe is good for you, which still has a beneficial effect, versus the reality. So there might be some ones I don't know about, but that's the last time I looked. I couldn't find any serious scientific study with a placebo, fake psilocybin tiny doses, to be true. But do correct me if I'm wrong. So it may work. It may work, but hasn't been disproved either.
Yeah,
so that's the other point.
Slightly. So there have been. I mean, I guess it depends on how you want. So there have been a couple of reasonable sized studies looking at microdosing with acid, and one small
LSD
one,
we're talking about.
Yeah, LSD, and one with microdosing psilocybin. So it was Rick Doblin from MAPS in the US, who sort of heads up a lot of the. I'm not sure how much he's raised to the research, but this is what's quite interesting. So the people that were microdosing did claim less anxiety, more focus, all these things. But the people that were taking the placebo claimed exactly the same thing. So there was no actual evidence. The belief that you're microdosing was as powerful as microdosing fundamentally. Yeah. And so again, it's dosage. There is no doubt from an outcome perspective, when people are taking macro doses of psilocybin, it has profound changes in things like chronic PTSD, certain addictions, alcoholism, for example. And if you compare that to sort of talking therapy, the outcome, there's no argument. The other thing is pretty much everyone who does the psychedelic therapy, who starts it, completes it, and the dropout rates on talking therapy is enormous, so you're not even comparing the same at the end.
I think the Imperial College is running a proper clinical trial with placebos, and they are finding positive results with psilocybin.
Is that with microdosing or is it with the macro? Okay.
Yeah, microdosing and using placebos, and they're finding correlations with depression and schizophrenia.
But you don't.
Bipolar,
if it's not finished, you won't know which group is
they are
which.
working on it. They've been doing presentations at conferences recently, and they're finding positive results.
Okay.
So watch the space, basically.
I think
one positive, one negative is what we're saying.
Not right now. I think that the weight of evidence doesn't look like it's trending in one particular direction. There are positive signs. I'm going to shamelessly plug my podcast here, the Doctor's Kitchen podcast, where we talk to Professor Nutt, who's the Imperial College researcher, who's done a lot of the early groundwork as well with other colleagues, and they were talking about this at the moment. So there's early positive signs. I personally think it will become part of psychiatric therapy. We're not at that point right now where I would recommend anyone go and do this themselves, because of what Tom was actually saying earlier about how difficult it is to know whether the lion's mane is actually truly lion's mane. It's very hard to find quality pharmaceutical grade products out there. I'm conscious to move on to different other questions if anyone has.
Isn't it ultra processed? What benefits? Because I've actually all the 30 plants with the process in it. It's being ultra processed, so is it not to look at the absorption, the nutritional value?
If it's ultra processed, would it affect? I mean, if you ultra process a mushroom.
Are we still getting the same benefits?
Well, it depends on your definition of ultra processing, but the daily 30 is not ultra processed, it's freeze dried, so that doesn't count as ultra processed. You're basically just rapidly taking out the water and you're leaving everything else
The benefits
there.
are still the same.
Benefits will still be the same, but if you had it as part of, cornflakes or something, where you take all these extracts, you stick them together, you add flavorings, you add artificial sweeteners, then you'd have a balance of the good effects, which might still be there, against the bad effects of all the other chemicals, and you wouldn't really know whether it was positive or negative. I think that's the difference. So it's so easy to freeze dry, you don't need to ultra process it, I think is what most people would say. But you will be seeing it more in snack bars and things like this, people adding it to really cheap toffee or, so I think that's the danger. We are going to, as soon as anything gets into the sort of headlines as good, then you start getting mixed up with these other chemicals, and generally that's going to have a negative effect. We won't know how much it counteracts the good effects.
But also, if you're in a health shop or Planet Organic, whatever, you think you're buying lion's mane powder, so it may not be, so you can't advertise it as lion's mane powder.
No, they
if
can.
there's no
They can.
guarantee.
They
Well,
can, because no one has to profile the powder.
Yeah.
No one's doing a DNA profile, so you have to
Because
be
they say
confident that-
it was sold to them as lion's mane powder. That's all. All. Then it's not fraud. And no one's going to go to China and actually sort of take them to court.
and you wouldn't be able to find them probably, but
Not necessarily have guaranteed them, because you don't know.
you can if it's someone who's actually growing the mushroom and then doing the extractions. Then they know. So I think one thing that I think is interesting is whenever we do our like a biological and like heavy metals test, we always have like 0 heavy metals, and yet every single product I've ever seen from China, and the only test they do is the heavy metals, actually that's not entirely true, but the other test they do, I won't bore you with the detail, but anyway, it always has heavy metals, a certain amount of arsenic, a certain amount of cadmium. But geologically, China does have higher levels of these in the Earth anyway. It's just like that. It's just the way that the Earth's crust has. But there is also, obviously, the reality of the pollution there. So a combination of geologically, it is much higher in a lot of these compounds anyway, or a lot of these.
So that's a sign it does come from China then.
I mean, it definitely
rather
does.
than from the West Country.
yeah. I mean, that's a good. Yeah, if it's from the West Country, it has no arsenic, cadmium, or whatever else.
It could come from India as well, like Indian rice.
Exactly.
High
That's why
level.
we see the
We have to
studies with
get
high
used
arsenics.
to know. You do the same exercise with meat and vegetables, right? And fungi are a relatively new product, and for a while we didn't think about it. But you wouldn't buy, chicken from an unknown source, or vegetables that come from, you don't know. So with fungi it's the same. You have to get used to, where it comes from, who grew it.
I think provenance in general is becoming quite an important topic.
It's part of your exercises.
Do we have any other questions? Sorry. Yeah, we've got one over there. Gentleman with glasses.
Hi, I was just interested to understand a little bit more about the controversy around the nootropic stuff.
Okay.
Specifically with the lion's mane, some of the interesting or exciting sort of study information around sort of in petri dish, neural growth on brain cells, density, length of neurons, connections, that sort of stuff. Why is it so different when you're looking at it just in the petri dish rather than in the brain? Why is it that not a sort of safe assumption to make?
That's a very good question. That's a very important question, I think. The difference between seeing something grow well in a petri dish versus then consuming said product and having the same biological effect in your own brain or whoever's brain you're trying to improve.
I think there can be a few elements to this. The first one, I don't really know where to start, but the first one is actually getting compounds across the blood-brain barrier to start with is not easy. So the neuroscientists we work with, they're a cynical bunch, understandably, and they don't think these compounds can cross. There's actually a paper that was published in February this year, which is actually very interesting, in particular for hericenones, which are in the fruiting body. And so one of the things we're doing with one of our PhD students, like literally right now, is we're treating stem cells with fats, basically, to restrict the growth of them. And then we're trying to find washing them, in essence, with our tincture at a very diluted rate to try and demonstrate some new neural growth, basically. At the moment, we're just killing it every time we try, so we haven't yet. Tim assures me that's good. That proves that there's biological activity. So we are killing the stem cells. We haven't found a dose yet where, we're relatively early on in it. So I think, circumstantially, a huge number of people that take our products claim all sorts of things. I'm quite a cynical person. I want to try and understand, or cynical, skeptical person. I want to try and, for my own benefit, understand potentially what's happening. Because the placebo is a real thing. And, if someone takes a product, believe it's going to work, it will work. And for 30% of people. So
what happens in a petri dish doesn't have to happen in a human body. That's
Most
the
scientists
thing.
are pretty skeptical of petri dish research because you can go to every single compound that's ever been made and find some evidence on a petri dish that it's helpful for the human body. Whatever you want, even arsenic, you'll find lots of things saying it's really good for you, looking at petri dish research, because no one counts how many petri dishes you've used to get the nice one that you take the photo of, right? Forget the other 99, this is the nice one that's going in the journal. And that's unfortunately, and it's just not real life. It's not the same. You can't mimic the brain in a dish in a lab. So most people dismiss them as pretty useless.
And the same with clinical trials, because some articles and some people claim, no, don't worry because it was a clinical trial. And you look at go back to the source, the first person that published the results and the study, and suddenly, we did a clinical trial with 5 people. And that's the other thing is petri dish first step, second step, clinical trial has been done properly.
With no placebo,
no placebo.
And 3 out of 5 felt better.
My family, I tried with my family. No, you have to have, there's some basic statistics that need to be fulfilled.
I think that was a great question because a lot of people can be tricked by, I was in a petri dish, I did this, and actually there are multiple steps, and there's a whole graveyard of not just supplements but also pharmaceuticals that have never made it into humans with efficacy because they just haven't been able to demonstrate efficacy in a bigger population. But great question. There was someone over here with a question. Is it you? Yeah, go for it.
I was just wondering, mainly Thomas, are you or anyone championing a sort of third-party accreditation?
It's an interesting one, this. So we're actually at the moment setting up like a trade body to try and. The problem is everyone else in my space is buying in product, and so we're the only people that are doing the analysis. Everyone else is doing heavy metal testing because that's what's required. No one, and a lot of people are slightly reticent about wanting their products tested because obviously if you have and I understand why, we've tested a few companies' products and these are European companies. The problem, one of the big problems is cost of production. So our cost of production is 10 times higher than if I was buying in dried mushrooms from China. So that's an issue. But every time we test for specific compounds in our products and test those against other companies, ours come back as much higher. So the issue that we're trying to address with the trade body is one, we all stand together because there's a lot of probably regulation coming in, but it also means that we can hopefully say, right, you need to X amount of these compounds in your ratio. Also, you need to DNA profile it. But obviously, businesses that are turning over, tens of millions of pounds a year, if you suddenly find out their lion's mane has nothing in it, are unlikely to be too happy about. They'll have a lot of product in their supply chain that they've got to get through.
Well, they did this for honey because there was a lot of fake honey around, and they did metabolite testing with mass spec.
We do quite a lot of that, and we've done with plants and bark, and we are planning to do with fungi as well, testing.
So there we go.
It's because
So someone like Q could actually do this and do some studies, taking stuff off the shelf and saying, okay, what do these look like?
We've done that at Oak, for example, with food as well, with types of.
Because I imagine mass spec, which measures the chemicals in it rather than the DNA, would give a pattern for each one that should be quite easy to sort out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean we've already got that. So and it's yeah.
Nice, brilliant. Any other questions? Yes.
What is the reason that most of these fungi are produced in China? Is there like a particular regulation that countries need to work around, or why is the supply chain so complicated?
Culturally, they've been growing mushrooms, so still, about 85% of the mushrooms that are grown in China are consumed in Asia. The American and European markets are tiny in comparison with the Asian market. So they just have the scale they do stuff at is unbelievable. They have, they are so, it's the equivalent of, I don't know, if you go back to the mid-18th century, some weaver in northern India competing with the Lancashire mills, that's basically where I am and where they are, just roles reversed now. And so yeah, it's just
They are
scale.
what we call mycophilous culture. They traditionally been eaten lots, and Britain is mycophagous, which means that
They're also
we
producing lots of
stir-
truffles now, and
they?
flooding the market with truffles,
Oh, wow.
which are like a tenth of the price,
They did
and
the same
quite
in-
hard to tell very hard to tell the difference. And of course, big money in truffles.
Yeah, they did the same with morels. They're way ahead of us when it comes to science. It's just unfortunate that there's no legislation asking people to at least prove that mushroom is in the product that you're claiming it's in.
But I'm hopeful. It's a matter of time. I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
We're just starting to
Yeah.
fight the way for.
There's no reason that, I'm sure there wasn't
It will
originally
happen.
legislation about honey,
Yeah.
proving that it wasn't just sugar
Exactly.
syrup.
Yeah.
And now, the organisation did get together and got it out
There's
there.
one question there, and I think we have another one over here. I'll come to you afterwards if that's fine.
And
Yeah, go
I
for
think
it.
that-
Oh.
I guess you just touched on it really, but you also made a point a bit from Heinz, every other country, in terms of how we view and how we used to be. I guess, where do you think we're going to be 5-10 years from now? And where would you like to be as a nation? How do you talk about fungi?
Where do you think our mushroom culture is going to be in 5 to 10 years? That's what I interpreted.
Is the
Where
UK
do we want it to be?
Is the UK going to catch up?
Is the UK going to catch up? Yeah.
I hope that we're in a very different position than we were just 5 years ago, and this has happened I think by just simply making people aware of unknowns like fungi. Merlin Sheldrake wrote that famous book Untangled, right? And suddenly everyone knew about fungi. And actually, he's made a big favor to us because, it's made people aware that there's a third kingdom called fungi. These are three F's for flora, fungi, and fauna now. So we've gone from not knowing almost anything and people being completely aware of fungi. I would say, I'm a mycologist, I work with fungi. Fungi what? And so people wouldn't know what we were working on. And we moved from that to, oh wow, you're a fungal, the fungi. So we are in that situation, and now, fungi are getting into our health and well-being practices and food. I hope that, in 10 years' time, they become something completely integrated.
But in
into-
Italy and Spain, every school kid knows
Oh, yes.
when to go out and collect the mushrooms, right?
Yes, yes.
And it's a
Yeah.
big family thing. Everyone knows this is the week we go and do it.
Every Sunday you go out to pick mushrooms. Now it's season now.
Yeah,
Everybody's
it's
out there.
Everybody's out,
collecting,
exactly. Yeah.
Foraging.
It's,
yes.
to pardon the pun, cultivating
Yes.
a culture that actually appreciates food more generally, and mushrooms definitely being one of them.
I think it's an interesting time we're in. I think COVID had something to do with the sort of bigger interest in nature. A lot of people were out walking. There was nothing else to do. And a lot of people, certainly, you've probably noticed it in terms of like a lot more mushrooms that we used to think were a lot rarer, because now people are identifying a lot more of these ones that we thought were very uncommon, just because of the levels of knowledge. And I think also in the sort of society where we're in at the moment, where there's been a sort of a collapse in sort of organised religion, fungi are sort of filling a bit of a space at the moment for people wanting to believe in something, because we've lost, the ability to have awe in things. We don't have ritual anymore. There's a big chunk of the routine of the sort of modern human that is very unlike what's happened for the last 100,000 years. And I think at this particular moment in time, fungi are occupying a bit of a space where maybe spirituality that used to be far more a part of our existence. And so I think there's an element to that as well, where people want something to believe in, and fungi are unfortunately fulfilling a bit of a
Good.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Do you want to go?
Yes. I suppose it sort of maybe links on to just what you were saying there, but I was wondering how much you sort of take notice of, take into consideration things like the traditional uses of mushrooms and the claims for them, like Chinese traditional medicine, etc. How much that factors into the research understanding, or whether it does at all.
I think it does. It does. We have to be a bit mindful about traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. In that package, you still have rhino horns powder. So there's a lot of lots of things in there that are not good for multiple reasons. But it can be a bit of a route map. It can be a bit of a guideline, because they've used it for many years. If there's some species that we have later on tested and seen that they have some bioactivity, what we call these compounds that are doing antibiotics or other activity. So there is some species in there that can be tested, and you can use TCM as a reference to look at things. What we're also doing at Q is trying to use for example, our collection to get the DNA of all those specimens that we have, and data mine, look at the properties of all of them using their DNA and characterize them, and use that for modeling and predict where we can find new molecules. That's, I think, is a bit more objective and not as biased as looking at some traditional practices that might be biased by culture and other reasons, not so objective. So we're using DNA data to mine, to look at as many species as we can, and see if there is some predictive power there. If we can tell, okay, all these groups of fungi may have some properties, or others not, or how. Because the funny thing now is that we're using, from antibiotics to statins to many drugs that come from fungi were found just by chance, by random, and is a bit inefficient. And we have lots of companies that are trying to find new drugs, and they have strains of a handful of species. We need to expand on that, and for that we have to increase the number of species of fungi that we look at. I think using collections or fresh material, but looking at diversity of fungi without a bias is the best way to go.
I think what's interesting from our perspective is that if you look at lion's mane, for example, that in traditional Chinese medicine was given for upper digestive tract issues, so for acid reflux, and now there's an isolate of a beta-glucan that is prescribed as an adjunct for esophageal cancer. So it's kind of, you could call it ironic, but the one area that lion's mane was traditionally given is the one area that we've now found a compound that is particularly effective against a cancer in that area of the body. It's the same with maitake, with Graphola frondosa. There's an isolate again of another beta-glucan, which is called defraction, which is again an adjunct used for colon cancer in traditional Chinese medicine. Maitake is given for the colon. We see some really interesting results with people who are injecting insulin. 3 of the mushrooms seem to massively regulate insulin, i.e. they drop the amount they inject colossally, and this is sort of pretty much uniform. And so Tim, who's the professor of neuroscience that we work with, he worked at Oxford for 12 years doing diabetes research. And so that's the next PhD we're going to get, is going to be looking at diabetes. So I think I completely understand, like, there's a lot of Chinese medicine which is bollocks. However, what's been interesting for us is that over the last decade, a lot of the adjunct treatments for cancer, so for example, in Japan, the second and third most prescribed adjunct treatments for cancer are isolates from turkey tail mushrooms called PSK and PSP, polysaccharide crestin and polysaccharide peptin. And they both are very good for numerous types of cancer. So there are lots and lots, an increasing number of isolates of compounds in these mushrooms that are being shown to be useful quite often in areas of the body that in traditional Chinese medicine they'd be given for. So there is, it's not that we're being like narrow-minded, it's just what's happening is, as we're doing the science, quite often, it's not all the time, but quite often there does seem to be a correlation between, it's fundamentally, folk medicine, the reasons things were used in folk medicine was because of the outcomes. And I think there's nothing wrong with looking at outcomes. In the West, obviously we've got far, empirical evidence is what's needed. In the East, they take a very different view of health, and outcomes are sufficient quite often to justify usage. And so it's a different approach. It's a more sort of holistic way of looking at things.
So we're going to wrap up there actually, because we've got some brownies coming round. Not the kind of brownies that you probably think we're giving, given that this is a mushroom event. But I just thought we'd applaud our wonderful panelists here as we close this evening, and I hope you enjoy those. We will be milling around for a little bit longer, so if you did have any burning questions, I'm sure our panelists won't mind. But thank you so much to Esther, Tom, and Tim.
Thank you for inviting us.
If you loved that episode, you will love the full library of podcasts from the Doctor's Kitchen Library. We talk about everything from inflammation, supplements, and food as medicine. Just like this episode right here. You can click it right now and check it out.